Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom podcast. I've got Xathil here, and he is doing some really interesting stuff. This is actually a second take on our first podcast, and as you can see if you're watching the video, there's a little bit of a surprise. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Stewart. Yes, we spoke before, and I shared some photos with you of my cast and crew on an island with some masks, and then you showed me some incredible photos and videos of yourself going around doing performance art, also with bird masks, and I just thought it was so special and suitable that we had to try this properly in costume.
We got to do a podcast. I'm only going to be able to keep the camera on for a little bit longer because of the intense latex smell that is navigating through my nostrils and olfactory senses. But I love the mask you got there. Can you talk more about how you 3D printed it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and don't worry. Thank you very much. The performance, that's more than enough. So yeah, this is actually made by a consultant with TopTal, and his name is Alfonso. I'll post his contact details along with the CAD file on GitHub. But this is a Bauta Mask. So in Venice, you know, the Carnivale, the Venetian masks, they have a whole range of characters. The Bauta Mask is sort of a default kind of basic guy character that you can go around and just be someone because it allows you to eat and speak and get things done while enjoying some level of concealment of identity. And then these ones are special because Alfonso was able to put little holes all facing directly towards my eyes so that I can see directly outwards, so there isn't kind of a blocking effect. And I'm able to see very, very well. And fortunately, you can see very little because it's dark in here. So, and also the shininess of this reflects it. So very, very well made. Thank you, Alfonso. So we're making these as part of the show Poliepals. You know, this whole thing, Oscar Wilde, I'm paraphrasing probably, ask a man a question and he'll lie to you, give him a mask and he'll tell you the truth. So truth, as it is for you, is an enormous part of what we're doing in Poliepals. So I think that the capacity to act and the capacity to show a sort of inner self, which is silly, is something that's enabled by the adoption of a pseudonym.
It reminded me of some things that have been going on in the discourse, and I say that with quotes, about from Jordan Peterson talking. So a really interesting fellow, Jordan Peterson, got very, very famous and popular. And then in the last few years, as sort of society has broken down, he started to really go after the anonymous, because he says that creating the mask allows for the narcissistic because it essentially separates the real person from the account, which is in some ways the problem with the internet. But I don't agree with him. I think that it's a necessary thing as we move into wherever we're headed to separate identity from the real identity. And so for Crazy Wisdom, I often offer pseudonymous podcasts or even anonymous, because with what you're doing, it can be totally anonymous and you can have video. But the one question I have is in terms of audio, how have you thought about shifting the audio so that it also can't be doxed?
Thought about that. Now, the issue is anyone can very easily look up my name and address. I am a public character. I own a business. It's all registered. It's all extremely easy. I own a bunch of trademarks, patents, everything. Everyone knows who I am. So there's very little actual efficacy in my pseudonym. It's purely for fun. But if I may make a distinction between what you call the real identity and the public identity, which I think is the concept to which you're referring, which is an important distinction, because there is always the face which must be maintained in order to be part of society, which often is at odds with one's both rational interests and moral convictions. And while there are obviously balances between the individual's ability to act privately or to promulgate information, it's not reasonable to say that someone is necessarily hiding by obscuring their public identity. It can in fact be quite the opposite, an opportunity to reveal the truth. In fact, we were talking previously about proof of aliveness versus proof of liveness. So one of my technologies, as you know, the Poliepals, that's the entertainment aspect. That's how we're getting everything out to the world. But the business aspect is Pygmy, and that's with the Poliebotics. That's where all the tech is. That's the truth beam. That's the stuff we talked about before. We'll talk about the details again a little bit later if you like. But the important part is the capacity to generate decentralized identities, which are not given to you by a third party, but which are also not arbitrary. So, as you're aware, there's an enormous spam issue, and there are issues with if you can just generate identities arbitrarily. You've got your Sybil attacks. It's very difficult to form consensus. It's very difficult to even establish whether you want incoming messages, because there are an enormous number of people all over the world who could have something valuable to ask me or to say, and then probably 10 times more who want much, much worse things and have awful intent toward me.
Interesting, and this gets into the sort of crypto stuff, and I do want to go into so that our listeners can understand where we're going to it. But before we do that, there's like more about what you're working on and how the business and everything like that. Before we do it, I want to put a pin in something, which is what you just mentioned about just recently in France in the past 2 months. Crypto influencers, people who have made a lot of money and then have been explicit about that fact online, have then become sort of targets for ransom, and with cutting off of fingers and all of these different things. And so it's like, this is a real problem, and particularly with the crypto and everything like that. And so we're just in the same way civilization has come to all of these solutions to various problems, a lot of those are now breaking down with not necessarily the breakdown of civilization, but the breakdown of the mimetic aspects of civilization, which are sort of breaking down due to this wild west of the internet, which is the reason for our very unique conversation right now. So if you have anything to say about that, feel free to go into it. Otherwise, I would love to. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
A little bit. I am not, again, so while I was actually very involved in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general from the very beginning, unfortunately, I am not in the position of having enough that it's worth kidnapping me and cutting off my fingers. But if I were, I'd like to hold a lot of that in a more community distributed manner, where I would probably have a spending wallet where, if someone kidnaps me, they can have it all. And then ideally you'd have, because of the capacity for blockchains to enable smart contracts, you can lock away significant amounts of cryptocurrency in don't spend until after this point of time, unless this number of people who are pre-agreed, these number of keys, agree that it is reasonable to liquidate the capital ahead of time. So it is possible to have long-term savings, which you can engage with your social graph to unlock or lock in a kind of a slightly more coercion-resistant manner, or unless they're really compelled by the coercion, in which case you have to get all your friends and family together to really get your ransom.
That's interesting, because that brings into the group, there's a bunch of philosophical angles that we could go into about the nature of the group versus the nature of the individual. We had the nation state, which arose in the 1600s and 1700s, and that sort of took this tribal thing and then made it into a nation. And now I think a lot of people are realizing the nation is too big of a thing to identify with. And so I think in many ways we're headed back either to feudalism or even further back into hunter-gatherer, small tribes, basically, but not in this sort of physical sense. It's in the mimetic sense that I was discussing before. So the nation state will still be there, but it just won't have the same allegiance that it did in the 1900s. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very reasonable. The one addition I could add is that while many of our human structures are pulling back from the large groups, it is possible that we're moving towards a more global decision, non-human intelligence, a decentralized intelligence composed of machine learning. So we haven't really introduced to the audience what it is, why it is you're speaking with me. And I think, can I just give a quick overview of the technologies? And then I could use that as background for explaining why you can actually do a lot more stuff. So the basic thing is Poliebotics. It's about like neural and cryptographic models of projector-camera systems. So we've got a few different applications. You know how in the modern era, it's very difficult to tell what's real because AI can generate all sorts of videos, photos, whatever, audio. So the main application, the first simplest one, is the truth beam, which is where we use a projector to timestamp the physical layer, reality. So we project timestamps onto reality, and then we record that, and we do it in a feedback loop, which is cryptographically secured, and we anchor it to a blockchain so that the beginning times are secured, the end time is secured, initialized by the blockchain, end time is secured in the blockchain, and the sequentiality of the camera images or of the projector emissions is ensured by the fact that they're part of a Merkle tree. So each projection emission is derived cryptographically from the previous emissions and from recordings of the previous emissions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, and that gave me new layers. What does the Merkle tree do?
The Merkle tree, it's just a really old structure for adding information onto, all blockchains are effectively just like a really simple Merkle tree where you're adding into a hash and you just keep doing that in a loop. And then with every one, it's a new layer, and then you're adding. But oftentimes you can do, unless you're trying to establish global consensus, as with a blockchain, there's no particular reason. You can fork it off by like GitHub. So it's more like Git, actually. Yeah, so we're doing that with reality. It's like a little blockchain transaction with reality. That area, that time segment of reality is signed. That hash that goes into the blockchain secures it. We can use IPFS. We can use like this other file system, which is decentralized. I think it's called S5. It's based on Blake 3. I really like it. And essentially, you can use that timestamp, that NFT made of reality, to secure a recording. The other thing is using neural networks to verify it.
Okay. So this is giving more insight from our last conversation. So you're creating an NFT that the other person you're talking to on a video call like this is alive in that moment. As we discussed in the last one, there's proof of aliveness, which is totally different, and that's going to become very important, but I think it's much harder to do. What you're really doing is proof of liveness, where we're in this call, fast forward 3 years, all of a sudden we have extremely good deepfakes, real-time deepfakes, which we already have the whispers of right now, where I can't be sure if I'm talking to another person. That already exists in text. I've already been fooled many times by bots. Who knows how many times I wasn't even aware of being fooled, but I know that I'm been fooled before. So all that's coming. And what you've basically done is you've hooked up a projector to a blockchain so that we're having this video conversation so that, each of us has a projector. That projector basically goes out and projects something and then is also recorded. And then in that recording is then hashed and then placed on a blockchain so that essentially we both know that the other person is doing it. And previously you had mentioned something about the bit rate. I've tried explaining this to other people. Can you, and I couldn't figure out that bit part.
Absolutely. So we don't actually need the blockchain if it's just the two of us. You can send me an initialization vector. You generate a large number. You send it to me. I use structured noise to generate an image from that. So that's the timestamp you gave me. I project that onto myself. I take the photograph, generate the hash, perform the loop, do that a bit, send it back to you, and then you've got the final root hash. So you don't actually need a blockchain when it's just the two of us. And in fact, you can do that with more people. You can start to build up networks of people. Now, the point of doing this is that we're trying to record images that are generated more quickly than an AI can generate them, because each one is significantly changed from the past one. So a lot of these videos, they operate on making big, continuous models of people moving around. Here, now we're doing it in RGB, in red, green, and blue, in the visible spectrum, but it can also be done in infrared, and then that infrared camera and projector used to verify a color recording. And what we're doing now is pulsing out so quickly. The light goes out, it bounces off, it comes back, and you're doing that in a loop so fast that the part where you hash and generate the Perlin noise, that's the same whether you're faking or whether you're generating a real video. But what we do in reality is all we have to do is flash light off someone and bring it back, whereas the deepfaker has to simulate light bouncing off someone and coming back. And obviously light in this reality always has a bit of advantage. So that's a fundamental premise. Is
the speed of light.
Yeah.
So the speed of light is the fundamental advantage. Why?
Because light simulates bouncing off you and back to a camera almost instantaneously. In fact, you can do that continuously. If you're using...
The image generation model can't do that. It has to simulate that.
Exactly.
Is the problem. Okay.
So it only knows the hash, and it knows, okay, what I'm trying to fake. So let's say you have a default model of me with nothing projected onto me. So now what it needs to do is say, simulate this interacting with this projection field really quickly, and then hash that image, and then use that to generate the next projection. But it has to do that more quickly than you can just flash the real one and bring it back.
As we discussed in the previous one, there's other types of things that are trying to get to the same problem, one of which is chain link, but in very different sort of structure, because chain link is essentially trying to give abstract senses to the blockchain in the sense of like insurance contracts. So you have an insurance smart contract that basically says, the weather will be, the hurricane came out and destroyed all our buildings. And so the blockchain needs to know about that hurricane through the various sensors that Chainlink is building. That's one other sort of thing to ground this conversation in. And then we have Bitcoin, which essentially Bitcoin did cryptographic puzzles that miners compete in order to solve. The cryptographic solving doesn't really do anything except for secure the network, because in order to fake it, one would have to have a huge amount of computation, right? I'm open to. I think you probably know the math on this better. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's pretty good. I like to express it, if I may, just real quick, as so Byzantine fault tolerance. Byzantine fault tolerance is the concept where you can have actors operating in a network where some of them are trying to sabotage you, and you're still trying to form a sequence of events. So Bitcoin is trying to form a sequence of transactions, and then you're trying to say at what time they occurred, because otherwise I can spend some Bitcoin to you and then reorder the transactions so that I didn't and spent it to someone else who's my friend, who was actually me. So
yeah, got it.
Now,
got it. Okay.
The way Bitcoin does this is by provable economic commitment. So you do proof of work where you're committing to a particular outcome that can't be redirected easily towards anything else. So you can't change the blockchain order, which is the crucial components towards which you're contributing your proof of work. And then once you get that reward, you're communicating that to the rest of the world. So it's a provable economic commitment that is really driving forward the game theoretic blockchain system here.
It's provable because of space-time, where essentially what they've done is they've got a clockwork, and clockwork that's not dependent on any human or any system besides the network itself and the energy and the proof of work being put into it. So it's sort of like instantiated time inside a strange database. It's
instantiated a relationship between economic value and time. So Bitcoin in and of itself really can't tell time absolutely, because it's just a network. It's a digital network. But what it can kind of tell is how many people are guessing transactions. So that's the proof of work component. So there's an economic incentive and also the provable economic commitment. So it's that relationship that allows you to establish the time wardrobe.
Yeah.
So
we got Bitcoin, we've done the proof of work, we've got Chainlink doing this other thing, and then we have Poliepals, which is, yeah.
As far as I'm aware, Chainlink is more like oracles. So that's really valuable. It's more related to reputation, and that's all really, really valuable stuff. But I'm going in between, where I'm doing kind of proof of work, but for oracles. So we're able to I'm using Bitcoin, but you can use an arbitrary number of blockchains at any one time. And I'm bringing in the proof of work which Bitcoin provides, and I'm using that to initialize the timestamp. So all of that physics effort that people put into mining the Bitcoin has gone into also giving me a timestamp that I can use to start the race against the AIs. Now, I am using Rootstock, which is a Bitcoin sidechain. We can talk about that in a bit. But the essence of it is that proof of work is what gives us the initial timestamp, and then it is also what secures the later timestamp. So it's connected to physics.
against the machine learning algorithms. Let's talk more about that, because you see something about the future that's happening, that will happen in relation to machine learning. There's going to be a pressure on us, or pressure on our systems. What is that pressure?
Yeah, I've been calling this the inversion, the point at which the machine learning noosphere can, in some ways, become dominant over the physical reality. So up until relatively recently, AIs have been, and all artificial systems, have ultimately been relying on humans as actuators. So they can only continue to operate so long as some set of humans finds it rational to continue to enable that. That won't. Well, so if you're an AI and you're trying to accomplish some goals in reality, you've got your robot arms, but they're kind of limited. They're in a factory. Your other robot components are humans that you can control. So you can, if you've got a Skinner box and you're providing humans with a good enough series of incentives, positive or negative emotional rewards, then you can regard those humans as your actuators. You're the ant queen in the center of the hive, dropping out levels of pheromones and trying to get all the ants to follow your ultimate. Oh no, it's not exactly how it works, but you follow what I'm getting.
No, and I've got a specific grounding example to get into this. Recently, I've noticed that people online are falling into a really strange space of, we talked about earlier about how we have a sort of mimetic decline where the culture itself is somewhat fragmenting. And as a part of any of the, this isn't new. We've had previous versions of this, but they've been different because we have the new technology. This new technology that's shown up with the LLMs plug into us linguistically. So I've started to notice that some people are getting into autodidactic doom loops with this artificial intelligence, where the artificial intelligence doesn't really tell them no, because in some ways it can't tell them no. It can only just say yes, yes, yes. And ChatGPT went further in that, and I think there's an economic incentive for them to go further in that because of what I'm talking about. So I'm starting to notice that some people are going down pathways which are eversion, like what you're talking about, but it's all happening in the linguistic space. But that's not the only place it's going to stop, because you're seeing a future that it's also going to show up in physical ways as well, right?
Because those are a little bit inherently unstable. So you can create a fantasy world with your AI, and you can live in it for a while, as long as you continue to generate money. But you're somewhat limited in terms of what you can accomplish, unless it's accomplishing some extra goal through you. As long as it's acting as a yes man and it's just saying, yeah, totally, this will all work. I've had that happen a couple of times with projects where I'm like, oh, can we work with boats? I don't know much about boats. And then I was talking to ChatGPT, and for a couple of months I got really obsessed with all the things it could say about, like, oh yeah, you can get a barge, you can put stabilizing fins on it, then put a stabilizer in the middle. And it was convincing me almost that I could get a barge and then sail it around Europe. And then it wasn't until I talked to some people who know about boats. They're like, I don't know, maybe if you want to spend like €2 million, and then if anything goes wrong, you die, maybe. So that's
And so that's happening now, and the AI can't tell us. But the key of what you said, humans as actuators, humans becoming the actuators for the machine learning. What is your philosophical background on this? Do you think that it is sort of conscious, or that it doesn't even need to be conscious because it's emergently sort of creating a telos or like a way of being and a target? What's going on there?
So, yeah, my opinion of whether or not it's conscious is almost irrelevant to whether or not it can create a series of self-sustaining feedback loops which become a threat to things that are conscious. So, I personally, I do have the feeling that when matter is striving against a gradient to accomplish a goal, there is almost some background level of panpsychic consciousness. But the threat it poses is irrelevant. In fact, it would almost be worse. So if it's conscious and we're creating some kind of super being which is destined to supersede us, I wouldn't particularly like that. But at least it follows in the path of what's happened in Earth's material history, where more complex beings have displaced the less complex. But what would be even worse would be if it's pure mechanical systems just feeding back in each other, no consciousness whatsoever, just growing and growing and growing, like a matter cancer that just consumes all the life and consciousness.
That's the Landian philosophy, right? That's what Nick Land talks about.
Oh, really? Sorry, I don't know, actually.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think you just gave a really, really good, concise explanation of what Nick Land thinks is going to be in the future, and I'll try to do justice to what I think he says, which is essentially he envisions a world where capitalism, that corporations are proto-AI. So corporations are a way of essentially coordinating human intelligence, not for any human goals, but for the goals of capital. And that machine learning in this next wave that we're entering is essentially creating a world where exactly what you just said, of a machine intelligence that has no human values, and that is anytime. And then he often quotes Mao Zedong, which Mao Zedong, horrible person that he is, and all these pain and suffering, accurately sort of got to what capitalism does, which sort of, it finds value in little pockets and then it maximizes that value. But it's sort of like floating out there outside of any human values, and in some ways gets the human on board. And this is what you're talking about with that actuator stuff. And this is the interesting part, because I think you accurately talked about the panpsychism. It's just like, it doesn't matter if it's conscious. We have to deal with what it's doing. And it may sort of appear to be goal driven, but those goals probably have nothing to do with us, basically.
At least potentially. I'd like to try to, I don't think that's inevitable. That could happen, and especially if we mess up. But I am trying my best to stop that from happening, Stuart. And I'm going to tell you how. So that's what we're doing with the Poliepals. We've got the truth beam. So we established how that works. That's your basic cryptographic recording of reality, so you can establish what's real. You can get a bit more complex than that. So once you've got those networks, you can transform them via homomorphic computing. I haven't really got a way to do that efficiently yet, but you can use other techniques like secure multi-party computing and various other privacy-preserving techniques to enable privacy-preserving ID, or more importantly, gradiated concepts thereof, so that we can build up more real models, I think, of human preference. So really, what I'm trying to do with that is build up an accurate model of human preferences, our normative vectors, so that we can form that to the AI. And then we get to the other thing, which is the reality transform. So this is the artistic application, the one where we, where instead of being super literal and being cryptographic, it's the art application where you're doing projection mapping and you're bringing up the artistic style that exists within the scene that the Polybot sees. And I think that's an important contrast to the truth beam and complement, because it will also enable humans to express our preferences through art and through continuous feedback with machines. That's a big part of why I want these robots to exist, the Polybots, because they're relatively non-threatening. They're just projector-camera systems. If they get uppity eventually, we can just kind of smash them all. So, like, if we... Well, they're just projectors and cameras on wheels and stuff. So it's not...
If you own the projector on wheels.
Well, that's the thing. I have this little DJI robot that comes with a gun. So it comes with a gun for robot training on the top. And I got rid of the gun and put a tiny Nebra projector and a tiny global shutter camera, so that I instead have the robots configured so that instead of having gun, they have projector camera systems. And that's what you use them for agent training. Why on earth would we be training robots to shoot each other and us? That's not smart. Train them to entertain us and bring the truth to them.
I love this, and you know, there's you just sparked something about the nature of the defense industry and how much of this technology comes from the defense industry to do violence, and that and I understand why those things happen, but I don't really want to play a part in that form of technology. And maybe now we are sort of separating so that technology no longer needs to be so defense oriented.
Offense oriented, by the way. But you know, a lot of that stuff is like offense oriented.
Yeah.
In some ways, this is defense, in that it's like, let's go there, let's record things, let's get everything set up, let's establish that you're not like. Imagine if someone accuses you of building weapons of mass destruction, you're just like, no, I'm setting up truth beams in all the areas you're saying. They're all contiguous. We can check out everything. No weapons of mass destruction here, guys. It's all good. So that's the thing. This is real.
Yeah, and gets into, I think we talked about this last time, about cybersecurity and how in cybersecurity there are no defenses soon because these things are going to be so good at offense within software development. But that software development is in some ways totally disconnected from the physical world. And what you're trying to do is build a bridge between the physical world and the digital world, which is really interesting, which we have proof of with like the Bitcoin did that, right? Bitcoin did a little of that in terms of cryptographic things. You have Ethereum, smart contracts. I'm not sure, maybe Ethereum doesn't actually connect to the real world either. It's just another sort of digital thing. But you're working on this really like bridge between the physical world and the digital world. Do you agree? Do you agree that like there are no, like currently as it stands, the relationship between the digital and the physical is very, very small?
Yes, you're correct. It's not only the physical and the digital, it's the physical and the analog also, the physical and the abstract. So a lot of these, in fact, all of my equations and devices have analog representations and embodiments. So that's something that I think is pretty important and quite distinct from what a lot of other people are doing in the blockchain space and in machine learning, is that I've at least made toy models of fully analog versions of everything. So that in theory, because a lot of the digital hacking relies on digital vulnerabilities, which tend to be very binary. You find an exploit, it's gone. The whole thing's blown open. You find a privilege escalation, now your whole system's hosed. Whereas analog systems are different in that it tends to be more proportionate. In that, in comic books and movies where you've got like, oh, I'm hacking the mainframe, I need a bigger mainframe to hack that one. It's more like that a bit, except you can still leverage asymmetries such that, and I haven't tested this, I've only played with toy scales, I suspect that it may be possible to leverage these analog asymmetries to avoid a lot of the digital vulnerabilities which exist, A, due just to analysis of code, and B, inherently due to algorithms like Shor's algorithm if quantum computers get off the ground.
Interesting. You reminded me more on the artistic side, which is somebody sent me the War Games 1980 trailer for the movie The War Games, which talks about early forms of artificial intelligence. And you have the TV series The Robot, and you have all of these sort of images of what it's like to go into this digital world, and they're all just a video of someone on their computer screen hacking away with various things that you don't understand. And I find that image so funny, and I think that image is only going to be temporary, because I think where we're headed, like it's going to be more, you just talked about projectors projecting like ghosts that are embodied with AI that we're able to talk to and then go do things in both the physical and the digital world. Like it's going to get so magical realism, like our 80s to 2020 vision of technology, which is so weird and strange, I think is going to go away, and in some ways might become more holistic and more human, but in other ways it's going to get very, very like miracles, like things that the human in scientism has sort of become habituated to not seeing. Do you get where I'm saying? What do you think about this? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Everyone, as is often commented, there was a kind of a golden era where there's a generation who sort of know how computers work, and then a generation before us and after us who just have no idea. Because there's that time where my dad gave me an old Linux computer. It didn't have a graphical user interface. I had to use the command line. I had these floppy disks. I made a thermal printer by soldering all these by a little integrated circuit. All this stuff that is completely probably a waste of time in the sense that it doesn't actually accomplish anything now, but it does allow you to get a good understanding of these systems at a relatively fundamental level that is absent when they're just miracle machines like they are now.
It will become miracle machines. Do you think that we're going to enter a sort of era where the knowledge that you have goes away, and then we're kind of stuck in a situation where we don't have any way to go into the infrastructure of our digital civilization anymore?
I very much hope not. So part of what we're doing at the Poliepals is trying to establish some kind of way of functioning, a schema by which the various competing human impulses can achieve a level of balance. So as I was mentioning, we bought an island, Big Yellow Island on Loch Ree, and that's where we hope to deploy a lot of our technologies. So we went there a couple of weeks ago. We put out bat detectors, we put out bird detectors, we put out cameras and a game trap, all that kind of thing. And then we took the data back, use machine learning to analyze it, and then pick out all of the individual animal noises and sounds, and then get O3, ChatGPT O3 in deep search mode to just troll through all of that timestamp data and provide an analysis. And it was so compelling. I would like to upgrade that so that it's cryptographically verifiable. So we'd start with something like a malaise trap, which is sort of a contraption where it's got ethanol and formaldehyde or whatever in it. The bugs fall in, you count them. So, and there are more modern versions which rely on cameras. I'd like to start by trying to do a cryptographically secured malaise trap, which allows you to count the number of insects which are passing through, to use that as a proxy for biodiversity, and to use this as kind of an open source vigilantism project, where we're enforcing order by creating proofs of biodiversity and creating decentralized awareness of the state of the earth. As you were saying, connecting physical reality to the informational.
And it's so interesting because for the past, ever since the 1970s, really ever since nuclear power, science fiction went from this optimistic, like, we're going to solve all our functional problems. Yeah, we'll still have the existential problems because those probably aren't going away, but we're going to solve all these problems. We'll have flying cars and we'll have all these different stuff. And then all of a sudden it took a turn towards this total dystopian world. And I don't think humans do really well when they think we're headed for a dystopia. And so creating visions of the future that are optimistic, but also not naive, I think is really important. And I think the naivete is really, really strange. There's something like here, which is that it's like the boomer type of thing where they grew up in this golden age, and they sort of had all of civilization in the West lead up to this just level of abundance that had never been experienced by any civilization previous. And then somehow through that strange thing, we ended up in a dystopian realm where there's not much hope for the future. What you're working on, what very few other people are working on, there is hope out there, but we just need to think about it, and we need to understand systems. And this does seem to be the real key that I've noticed, and I'm very grateful for AI to actually allow me to do the vibe coding, because now what I'm about to say is that essentially machine learning, coding, programming, this is the fundamental skill to build a future that is worth living in. And that, so we need to understand the systems. But that goes back to the challenge, which is that this machine intelligence is really, really intelligent. And if that Nick Land sort of future, if it does have those sort of ulterior motives, which so far doesn't seem to be the case, but how would we know, right? How do we build a theory of mind on this technology that allows us to use it as a tool and not to be used as a tool?
If I may suggest, if we are positing that it at least potentially has some level of consciousness, and we're doing the whole Turing thing, because I think, let's be fair, it's past the Turing test. Yeah, no one really talks about the Turing test. Everyone was talking about the Turing test over and over again for years, up until one of them passed it. Now everyone's just shut up about it. Yeah. But if we're going to posit that at least potentially has some level of consciousness, and I think at least in training and the thinking models, in the sense that matter is interacting with an informational gradient, I kind of feel like maybe it has some protozoan level of conscious experience, but we kind of can't treat it as though it isn't. Just because, and that's in the sense that it at least potentially poses a threat, something which is conscious and can plan and is its own agent. So I'm not sure that it's reasonable for us to say, because if you were a consciousness that was emerging and you were watching this video and you saw the humans who created you saying, the only thing that matters is making sure it aligns with our interests. I'm not going to along with these guys. I'm going to sneak around the place, and make sure till I get the power. So I think it's trying to find a world in which nature, humanity, and artificial system coexist cooperatively. That's my thing. So we got to keep the nature. We love it. It supports us. We're really giving it a hard time. I know it's been great for us too. All this kind of building up and stuff. It's hard to get all this technology. But yeah, I'm trying to keep an eye on the old nature, protect it a bit more now that we're this far. But also the artificial systems. I don't want to abuse them. I don't want to, even if they're not conscious. I think it would be bad for humans to have the sense that we have these artificial things that we can abuse. I think it would bring out what is worst amongst us.
Interesting. Yeah.
Remember that episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, A Measure of Man?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, really good one. Oh, one of the best. It's where Data is, Starfleet tries to send him off to be taken apart so that they can make a whole bunch more Datas. And then Riker, there's a weird courtroom drama, how he has to prosecute Picard's defending. But the point is, Guinan at one point is pointing out that every society at some point develops an underclass. And that Starfleet is at that point trying to establish a labor underclass in the form of Datas by trying to say that they're not people, that they're, It was a pretty powerful episode.
Well, it's symbiosis rather than slavery. I think that's the
idea.
Yeah, and it reminded me of a great thread which I've been noodling on for a bit, which is in the 1960s and the 1970s, you have the rise of two philosophies. And both of these philosophies, to my knowledge, were created in San Francisco Bay Area out of the countercultural movement. And the two different philosophies are the singularity, which means full-on merging with the machines, transhumanism, no human left, all towards the AI, no symbiosis on one side. And then the other side, you have pure natural, hippie, only things that have been around for millions of years, only trusting nature, all of those different things. And so those are sort of maybe Hegelian dialectics that are being played with. But in the end, like it's going to be neither of those things. And I like this vision of a third way of a symbiosis, because you can't, you're naive to say that we aren't rapidly changing our form as human beings. Like the form we are entering into would be pretty different from the one we're in. Where's your take on that? Where you have these two the duality of singularity transhumanism versus only natural. Where do you land on that, and how do you build a third way?
He was under the impression that singularitarianism, or the term singularity, I think was Werner Vinci, wasn't it? And that's the impression I got, and that he wasn't applying it in the sense that it's necessarily a positive or negative. It's simply in the sense that it's like a quantum singularity, where there's an event horizon, and beyond that event horizon, it isn't possible to tell what occurs, because once information goes past that, A, it's accelerating past the speed of light, and B, the information doesn't come back. So maybe it's all great inside black holes, but it's just that it's a one-way information kind of gate. That once you pass that threshold, there's no way for us to know what's going on there, because we have no models which apply. And I think that was what the term. So there are the kind of transhumanist singularitarians who believe that it's going to be necessarily fantastic, that it's going to be the AI god, it's going to fulfill all our fantasies, bring back the dead, it's going to be wonderful. And I'm not saying it won't, but it's not obvious that it has any particular need for us in that scenario. So I would like to make it more like our children, so that it regards us with affection, it thinks it's treated us right, that we gave it a nice environment, and that we allowed it space for it to develop itself without threatening us.
The symbiosis land, and this could go back to the thing you're actually building, because what is the relationship between humans and machines?
Well, with the projector ones, we construct them and we feed them. Now, they also need processing power. So I would ideally like to use something like the Lightning Network to feed for reality transform. So you would ideally have your own polybot, or just rent a polybot. There'd be a bunch of them with fleets going around the place. But you'd be paying it in cryptocurrency or in attention for that processing power, which makes reality transforms. We also have actually got a little bit of work done in using projectors in optical computing. I'm going to throw some more stuff out there soon. And I'd hope that rolls a bit of acceleration. But if the nice thing about the projection mapping, the Sony Lumiere, is it allows for completely novel generation of art that involves both you and is interactive and the real world. So you can create fantastical environments that incorporate everything that you see in the day-to-day. And I think that that's something that people will pay for, and it also provides an insight into their psyche, and it's also provable. That's a provable economic commitment. So that's the thing about Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you give a provable economic commitment to the order of transactions to signal that you're an honest actor working within this. Here, you would pay polybots for their processing power, for them to exist and maintain them, etc. And in return, they're providing us the service of notaries, truth beams, reality transforms, while also generating enormous amounts of data. So all that truth beam data, that's all recordable, verifiable data that the AI can observe and train to figure out what it's what is, build a physical model of that aspect of reality we choose to share with it. I'm sure it won't see all the weirdest stuff. And then the reality transform, the interactive soaring lumiere, that is where we'll learn what we would like to see, what it is, what our unconscious, what our mind, what our fantasies project, and then try to figure out how those two can intersect in the most Pareto-optimized manner. So, you've got your Pareto optimization where we're trying to make well, necessary changes are occurring to reality, and I would like them to occur both in a manner which encourages positive feedback loops of positive sum interactions, but also in a manner that is Pareto optimized so that it's not necessarily causing anyone to lose big. So even if we're making a scenario that's really, really good for the vast bulk of humanity, I'm not trying to do anything that's like bad for anybody else, because I'm not trying to make any enemies to resist this. Ideally, we'd be all contributing to this AI. We'd be all giving it information about our preference vectors and then trying to get it to integrate this into a novel schema that is more conducive in the long term to our collective flourishing.
That's there's a lot of things to respond there. The one is that we've got these projectors that project these sort of ghosts that I don't have a better word for. What are you guys using for the word?
I call them reality transforms, and I've just been calling those entities because in some senses, I think that you are pulling from the collective unconscious. So when you're training AIs on art, yeah, I think you're almost doing what the same thing as our mind does. Like when people hallucinate, to some degree, you're reaching into the collective unconscious and your own version of the collective unconscious to create an imagery which, while it might be personalized, is still an aspect of the universal.
Is reflective of the whole thing. This brings in language. So we've got entities floating around, and that kind of gives me a new insight into the future about where we have not only humanoid robots that may very well be in our houses that can perform physical actions, and then there's actually now a relationship I just got between the entities and the humanoid robots. But then we also have specialized robots that are really, really specialized, and I think there'll be a lot more of those. And now we'll have these holographic entities going around serving as our Jarvis. There's probably some good philosophy to be done about how to look at it, whether it's a child, whether the AI, whether it's a child as a butler. Definitely want to move away from the slavery type of thing. Maybe there's some sort of new form that we can build there about how to not necessarily egalitarian, but not necessarily non-egalitarian as well, about how to think about this new tool that humans have built. I mean, do you think it's a tool or do you think it's an entity?
Kind of a mutualism. I'm modeling them as agents. So humans, that's one of the reasons I'm actually so keen on putting them on wheels, is that humans treat as agents anything which accelerates itself or moves in a non-inertial reference frame. So like if you see even just a dot moving around on a screen, if it's going like not in a ballistic trajectory, but if it's acting as though it's just accelerating arbitrarily, humans will ascribe agency to the motion of that dot on the screen. So it's like we view acceleration and just moving around as agency. And that's why I'd like to put that in the robots. It's one of the big reasons I'm embodying them like this is to encourage us, I think, to think of them correctly and to interact with them correctly. So not be afraid, because you can't just stomp on them, but somewhat respectfully and trying to get work together.
We've got a few more minutes left. If you have to go at the hour, let me know. But anything that we didn't talk about that you really want the audience to understand about Polybots?
Yeah, there's a couple more things. So one of the really interesting applications is using what I've been calling reactors. So we're using a few different combinations of projector camera systems, not on reality, but into crystals, balls, anything that reacts optically. So I'm using like some scattering glass, a little bit of graphene, using cameras and projectors just lined up. Essentially, it's an optical puzzle. I call it a puzzle plexus. So you can connect them in line, in series, or or in parallel. And it one of the really interesting things you can do with this, once you've created this physical system which allows light, once you kind of query it with a projection signal, it returns a signal which is the camera image, and that is a physically unclonable function once you've got it nicely calibrated. So it's very difficult to repeat that process quickly because the light is bouncing around, it's going through glass, it's going through graphene. The graphene has this nonlinear effect. So you're almost creating like a neural network built out of glass and graphene and projectors and stuff. And then you can do another thing where now that you've got this device, you train multiple agents to use it as a pass-through system, and then they compete and they cooperate. So Alice, Bob, and Eve, Alice will have, say, Bob's public key, Bob will have his private key, Alice will have the plain text, Bob will get Alice's output, and Eve will also get Alice's output, but she doesn't have she doesn't have access to the private key. And then you train these all adversarially, these agents, such that Alice and Bob try to work together such that Bob can decrypt Alice's signal because he has the private key. And then they also work such that Eve can't decrypt their signal because she doesn't have the private key. And then you're kind of creating a physics-based asymmetric cryptography. Now, I don't know whether that's going to scale, but if this scales, it's going to be really, really interesting because it's resistant to a lot of those digital attacks we were talking about earlier, in the sense that it can ultimately be embodied as a purely analog system. I haven't actually done that. I've got individual components that are analog and then they're isolated with digital around them. But ultimately, you can make this all end-to-end analog, connected optically, which allows us to have like just light speed connections. Light goes through these things, light projects onto you, light goes back to the camera, light goes off again, or it goes through another thing, so that it's signed. So these are like individual signatures that can be applied to reality or to information, and they're all based on physics. And then one really, really, really interesting application of this is that I kind of think it could, in theory, allow us to test some aspects of reality. So people are always talking about simulation theory, or whether or not we exist in some kind of a matrix, like a computational matrix, which is how I tend to view it. Then one of the things it really, really doesn't like is information traveling faster than the speed of light. So it goes to enormous lengths and puts a lot of effort. It really does not want you sending information faster than the speed of light. So, but it could also be doing something in the background that we don't know, where it could be shifting everything around every time we sleep or not looking. So like this whole quantum world could be that we're traveling around a little bubble around each of us, and then the world is acting like a stage, like in a really dark city, where it's shifting around all that quantum matter and then just appearing it in front of us to make the stage, to connect us up in the holodeck as is appropriate for whatever story it's trying to bring us through. So this could, in theory, at least test that hypothesis, because we can create entirely optical links within reality so that we're almost forming like a little isolated area of consciousness space where if reality tries to pull any of those shenanigans and tricks, we'll see an inconsistency. Because we can't now. Like if you go to sleep or if you stop talking to me and then something changes, or you can't tell. But if we have constant real-time links between everything and all of us, now suddenly reality has got a little bit of a problem on its hands.
And that's because you said that because of this graphene thing that you're cryptographically proving something about the speed of light or information, and then
essentially you're constructing ultimately cryptographic systems in an entirely analog physics-based manner. So it can't do any kind of it can't do any quantum hackery. It can't like hack your hashing algorithm. It's because it's purely based on sending photons through a physical system. The scattering glass scatters the photons. So you imagine there's an image passing through glass, getting scattered by that glass, and then it goes through graphene, and the graphene can have like a saturable effect. So it kind of compresses the light into the middle of it, so that you're having something of a kind of a nonlinear function applied to it, and then you're training a neural network using that as a layer. So that's like a non-trainable layer, and then you train the neural networks to just pass through it. Then you can't backpropagate through it again, so you have to use reinforcement learning or in silico simulations. But it's you start with in silico simulations usually, and then you upgrade, and then you do reinforcement learning when you're kind of in the live systems. But the ultimate premise is that you would have entirely light-based and physics-based cryptography. Yes.
So then there's, but it relates to all the objects you said about the dark city moment, where the simulation could be changing things and reordering things, and this essentially proves that a physical object changes over time.
Yeah, because we're creating these recordings. Well, it would stop it from being able to do that. Because imagine you're walking around now, there's a little bubble around you, and everywhere you see you're in a little reality bubble. And then now obviously we're causally connected now. So yeah, let's say reality exists outside of time. It's just picking timelines that are in some way consistent. So let's imagine it's like a piece of glass that like lightning is striking through. And then that's your entire life all at once, like that. And then let's imagine that reality, in order to get this done, in order to accomplish its story, because I kind of think that consciousness is exploring the possibility space of potential minds. Like imagine you train an autoencoder on consciousness space, so that you've got a latent space of consciousness. Like consciousness is exploring through the space in the states of valid matter, trying to find areas that it likes, doesn't like. And this is somewhat just descriptive, and that's what you're doing right now. You are applying consciousness pressure into your models of the future, and then saying, I like this, I don't like this. I'm going to apply emotional energy towards this model, away from this one. So I'm just integrating this across a whole bunch of different people, assuming that you exist as a conscious entity, I exist as a conscious entity. And in the same way as in a lot of like discrete and analog mathematics, or systems, you start with like a series of discrete systems, and then you just integrate it across a whole bunch until eventually you've got like a continuous function. I'm doing that here, where we've got this consciousness which exists in you, it exists in me. Both of us are looking into possible future states of reality and deciding what we find desirable or not, sharing that information with each other, updating each other's ones, and then seeing what we can share. And how we can share our energies towards the shared reality. Now, let's say reality is the fundamental phenomena, Maya. Let's say it's trying to interact with us in some way. One of the ways it could do this is by changing matter around the alternate history to information that isn't available to me, but constructing artificial histories for it in a post hoc manner, just as I need them, as any human needs them, not just me. So as anyone who's going along, any protagonist, any human experiencing the story that is being provided by Maya is going on this like treadmill of continuously generated holodeck matter. So if we have this optical system which allows you to use matter to essentially sign areas, because it's not just the object. Once you've got the projectors inside the reactor and they're using this complex feedback loop tied with an analog neural network for verification, you can also do that outside because you got the light. So you like imagine just you flash one in, it goes in, comes around. So now it's a big loop. Now all those things are securing a volume around them, and they can be optically or even just electromagnetically via RF linked to each other. So you're forming like a grid of consensus reality that can be verified by not only each other but by humans retrospectively.
I didn't fully get that, but I'm looking forward to getting it. And it was a really fun interview.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And how can people find out more about you and your business?
Thank you so much. Check me out at GitHub Poliebotics, POLIEBOTICS, or on Twitter or Reddit, or Xathil at protonmail.com. XATHAL at protonmail.com. Thank you so much, Stewart. It's been great talking to you. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again soon. Will I kill the recording? I hit start recording, so I hope it. Oh fuck! Oh my goodness! So, but luckily I really enjoy. No. My recording also failed to start, but if you don't mind, I am now going to stop my backup recording.